Hello everybody and welcome to 3 Colors Up. In this one we're going to be tackling the legendary Typhoon Ground Attack Aircraft for Flames of War. An interesting plane, fantastic history with it as well. One of the more renowned ground attack aircrafts of the Second World War, right alongside the Russian Sturmovik, for example. I think maybe the American Thunderbolts as well, perhaps. Because it's ground attack, it's got rockets on board, it's got 25-pounder rockets, it's got 20mm cannons. It has everything a ground attack aircraft needed in the Second World War. Great canopy, good all-round visibility for the pilot, big powerful engine in there too, and a very distinctive shape. I've noticed a lot of ground attack aircraft have a very distinctive look about them. The Sturmovik is very long and sleek looking. The American Thunderbolt is a big, bullish thing. The Typhoon is kind of a mix between the two. It's got a bit of that streamlined look to it, but it's got big, thick wings, a big, huge air intake on the front underneath the engine. It's just a really intimidating, imposing aircraft. And to have those in your British Army in Flames of War is great, because what it's doing, from an aesthetic point of view, is giving us a bit of colour, a real big stab of bright colour. Particularly in this one, because we're going to be doing invasion stripes on it. There's some yellow trim and stuff like that to play with as well. Keeping the weathering nice and simple, mostly working on panel lining and getting the camouflage right. I will note, and I do mention it in the video as well, the transfer sheet that came with my box was a little bit fragile, so it felt like an older sheet. I think Battlefront have that rectified by including aircraft transfers in the blister pack you can buy. I'm not too sure, I can't remember exactly how that pack works out. Anyway, this was a fun one. Hope you enjoy it as well. Let's get down to the table and paint it. So the first thing I want to talk about with our Typhoon is the colour that it's been base coated in. That is Citadel Grey Sear. That is just the aerosol can. And what it does is give us a really nice smooth finish. It preserves a lot of our panel lines. It doesn't get too clumpy or anything like that, and settles in rather nicely after a good coat of it. So this does two things. One, obviously, base coats the model. Two, it also provides our underside colour, because the underside colour is a very light grey on the Typhoon. And what we're going to be doing is putting a darker grey over the top to get that contrast between the two. So for that base grey, we're going to be using Vallejo model colour, medium sea grey. And we're going to put a bit of that out here in the corner. As you see, I'm still using my happy little thing down here instead of a palette pad or anything like that. We can just use this Greenstuff World. I can't remember the name of right now. Brilliant. And it just, even when this paint is dry, it just peels off and we can clean the surface back down again. It's very handy. So we're wanting to apply this over every part of the miniature that is going to be our grey, which means we want to do every upper surface, every top surface of the aircraft. So when we go back as far as the tail here, what we want to do is sort of draw a bit of a line like so, and run that to the trailing edge of the wing, something like that. We can also bring this down a little bit further if we want to, and level that line up a bit, like so. Now we're not going to worry too much about that right now, because we are going to be putting invasion stripes and stuff on the wings later on. And for now we're just going to focus on getting this base coat down. Where we do need to care about the underside colour showing through is off the leading edge of the wing. And what it'll do is we need to draw a line here and carry it down, right down to the base of the big intake on the front, so something like that. But apart from that, we just need to be careful to make sure we keep those lines preserved. And then it's just a matter of applying this grey. We're probably going to need to do about 2 coats for this. So when we come back, this will be done and we'll be ready to move on with our next colour. With our grey down, we can have a look and see what pattern we've sort of got here. Might need a little bit of a tidy up along the trailing edge of those wings, but that's all right. And don't forget, because we did grey sear underneath, or for the base coat, we can always just go back with some plain grey sear afterwards and just tidy some of those lines up, like they're a little uneven on the wings. However, I'm reluctant to do that at this stage because what we have to do is a load of other colors. So we're going to be doing a camouflage, there's going to be a little bit of trim and stuff like that. So for a camouflage, we're going to move on to Vallejo model color, Refractive Green. You'll see me, I've used this quite a lot actually in a lot of my different sort of World War II schemes. So move that to the side and put a little bit of water onto my brush and thin it down a little bit. Now, the pattern really is just wherever we feel like it, to be honest. So what I'm going to do is a little bit here, and that's going to encompass the wingtip. And don't forget, no matter what we do here as well, I'm going to be putting invasion stripes on as well. So there will probably be a little bit of overlap here and there. So one there, we'll maybe have one that starts maybe just around here, like so, and the other side of it will start maybe about here and swoop in. And then what we'll do with that is carry that up onto the fuselage, about there. And then what we can do is catch it back up here and sort of run it across the top of the fuselage like that. So it's going to be a case of just drawing the camouflage wherever you want. Use reference images if you really feel like you want to do that as well. And then after that, it's just a case of filling in all these lines nice and carefully. Again, probably going to be about 2 coats of this color to make it right. And I know that we're going to be ruining it later on with the invasion stripes, but it's good to have the camouflage down in a way that looks proper before you start adding those markings as well, because we'll be able to block out those markings with some white primer that we're going to do later on. So in the meantime, we're going to get on with the camouflage and we'll just apply it everywhere we want to. Then we'll come back and start looking at what our next step is. So with our camouflage now down, we'll have a look around the aircraft and see what we think. Could probably do maybe with another coat, but that's all right. That's looking pretty good to me. Once we have our panel lining and stuff down and our transfers and everything, it should look fine. We're going to move on to invasion stripes. Now there's going to be 2 big invasion stripes on our wings. So roughly round here to here, and same on the other wing. On the fuselage, we have 2 options. You can either take the stripes all the way across the fuselage, or in some cases, we can just run the stripes underneath. And I think this time I'm going to run the stripes underneath. It's going to clean this line up a little bit, and it's going to get us something that looks a little bit different and gives us a detail that we can look at and go, oh yeah, cool, you actually did it properly underneath. So what we need for this first step is some matte surface primer white, and I like using this as my go-to sort of white color now. So a bit of a shake, and then we'll just put some of that out onto the table. Now this is going to be a little bit laborious, so we need to do this as careful as possible. So we need to know where the inner part of the stripe is going to go first. So for example, here, I think we're going to take it roughly halfway along this long line here. I'm just going to very lightly draw it somewhere like that. What I'm kind of doing is using my eye to draw this line while watching the edge of the fuselage as well, and trying to get a line that is going to work for us. So it maybe needs to curl a little bit, needs to sort of come this way a little bit more, just to be a little straighter on the wing. And then the outer part of the stripes, the other side of the white, needs to be, I'd say, maybe about here. Obviously, we're going to clean those lines up a little bit. So what we're going to do then is, once we have our lines drawn, we're then just going to start filling in this entire area with our white primer. So we're just going to get stuck into that. And when you come back, we'll have the white areas all laid out. So with our white down and blocked out, let's have a look here.
there's a little bit of inconsistency with the width and the shape between the left and the right wing. I think this one could have probably come out a little bit straighter, but in reality, these aren't perfect anyway. I know you see them a lot in museums where they've been all perfectly painted and stuff like that. But if you see some of the old footage, particularly maybe some of the gliders or transport aircraft, these are applied with paint rollers. You know, these really aren't perfect, and I don't think they're going to be too concerned about them being completely even on either side of the wings. So that's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. So from there, we're going to move on to our black stripes. And for the black, we're going to be using our matte surface primer black. Just because these are just too handy. These really are just very handy colours just to have sitting around. And good value for money for the amount of paint you get. So we're going to need to take a fairly fine brush to line these out. Now, there should be 2 black stripes per white block. So we need to sort of figure out the areas that we want. So I think if one of the stripes started about here, we'll just carefully try and draw that in. There, and then the other one will go sort of a bit equidistant about there. We'll sort of use those as the basic marks. And then what we'll do, just to keep it as careful as possible, is slowly work on widening these. This is a bit time consuming, so I don't blame you if you decide not to do this. So the idea is to broaden the stripes to the point where we want them, where we think they're going to be basically equal to the amount of white. Not a bad start. So we'll do that with the rest of them, including the one underneath the belly as well. And we'll make sure these are nice and neat. So when we come back, we'll see what the stripes look like in the end. And then we can move on. With our invasion stripes now done, let's have a look and see what we think. So again, not the best. Definitely not the best, but not too bad. We've also went underneath and done a little bit of the underside of the wings and sorted out the one under the fuselage as well. So they're there. It's a nice splashy colour. But speaking of colour, we're going to move on and we're going to start with some Phoenix Flames from the War Paints range from Army Painter. And this is going to be applied as a colour for a couple of sections on the leading edge of the wings, as well as the spindle on the propeller. The spindle is the nose cone. So what we need to do for the leading edge of the wings is there's a panel that starts just beyond the cannons, so about here. And that is going to travel all the way up our leading edge here. If it'd be easier if I just put a bit more paint on my brush for this, just to mark it out. And that's going to go all the way up here to basically where the wing starts to curve. There's a panel line here that I'm going to use as my stopping point, which is here. And then we're going to draw it back to about there. So that's going to be on both wings. And then obviously our nose as well is going to get the same treatment, but it's going to be the whole part of it. Now, this is going to take a few coats of paint. So what I want to do is just get all that done, and then we're probably going to move on. And I say we're probably going to move on to maybe the canopy color or something like that. I'm not too sure yet, but in the meantime, we're just going to get these colors down. Another really great bright splash of color on these aircraft makes them really stand out. So we're going to do this, take several coats or as many as we need, keeping it nice and thin, and then when we come back we'll see how that looks and then we can move on. So with the yellow on our nose and on our leading edge on our wings, I also went off camera and did the rockets as well, just painted them in the same refractive green that our camouflage was done in, because I'd honestly forgot about those. And I also gave the canopy another coat of the grey, just to tidy up the camouflage around here. That's going to be important now, as we move on to our next step. So we're going to be colouring our canopy in, and for this we're going to be going a contrast paint, Gryph-Charger grey, because it's kind of a nice darky blue grey. I think it should work all right over this sea grey that we have down as the base colour. So the theory is that this will just dull and just pick out the colour of the canopy in a slightly, a more interesting tone. And then afterwards we should be able to give this maybe a gloss coat at the end or something like that, just to make it look a bit more interesting. And all I'm wanting to do here is make sure that the paint flows into the very edges of the canopy. Remember, we're just trying to keep it simple, but we also want the contrast paint to do a bit of its own work here and shade down towards the bottom of the canopy. We don't want it to pull too much up at the top in any sort of meaningful way. We want it to pull along the bottom edge, just to get that shading in there a bit. Like so. I think when that dries that should look alright. It at least makes the canopy stand out a little bit more, rather than just being, a flat, boring colour. It's got something going on. Now, we're going to move on to our exhausts, and for that we're going to be using Vallejo model colour Saddle Brown. It's a nice sort of reddy brown. Works well for a bit of surface rust and heat on these exhausts, and again it's another little flash of colour that helps us along the way. So again, I'm just gonna do that as a base coat. Make sure there isn't too much water or paint on the brush. Get into a better position here. Just like that over the side, top and bottom. Nothing more complicated than that. And again on this side. Like so. So we're going to let those dry, and when we come back we will talk about some decals. I think we'll actually have decals applied before we do anything else. So I'll apply them and then we'll talk about them when we come back. With the decals now down, there's a few things I want to mention here. A, if you've bought this kit, be careful with the decals because they're incredibly fragile. At least the ones in my box were. The paper looked kind of old. They took a long time to soak in the water before they were released on the film. So yeah, it was a bit laborious. This wasn't the original set I wanted on it because they literally fell apart. Even on this side, you can see the lettering isn't quite right because it started to crumble on me, and I didn't really have much more choice than to go with these ones. So with that now done and sealed with, moved with decal softener and put in place and whatnot, and saddled and dried, we're now going to gloss varnish the model because we want to retain the cleanliness of the paint that's already down, plus we also want to seal those transfers down as well. So for that we're just going to be using simple Citadel Ardcoat because it's handy. Any other gloss varnish will do the exact same job. So the entire model is going to get a coat of Ardcoat right now, and then after that we're going to be moving on to some panel lining. With our gloss varnish now down, it's time to move on to some panel lining. And I just want to look around the miniature again just to show you, yeah, we have plenty of gloss varnish on there. Everything's settled quite nicely. Now for our panel lining, we're going to be using Nuln Oil. Simple, not too complicated there. And this process is aided a little bit by the gloss varnish. So this will help keep the wash where we want it to be. So for example, here on this wing, get it into a better focus for you. It's just going to be a case of running our wash along all these lines. And it is a little subtle, I will give you that. It does come across a little subtle. But what it does is draw your attention to the details of the aircraft. And by doing this, we're adding that little bit of extra detail that is actually on the miniature and just accentuating that a little bit. So as subtle as it'll be, you will notice, and that's maybe a little bit too much on that piece of wing there, but we're going to go ahead and do that over everything, underside included. So it's just going to be a case of being patient and just going for it. So obviously, if you're doing this at home, set yourself a fair amount of time, or an appropriate amount of time. Maybe it's just during your regular painting session or however you manage your painting at home, just to go on ahead and do just this little extra detail, just to bring everything up. But after this step is done, we're then going to be giving the miniature a coat of matte varnish. Everything except the cockpit, everything except the canopy is getting a coat of this. We'll probably actually give the canopy another coat of gloss just to heighten that a little bit. But this will bring everything back down and will also mean that we'll have finished the miniature. So after this step, the next thing you'll see will be the miniature completely finished. With our panel lining done, our matte varnish applied, and a re-gloss of our canopy, our Typhoon is now ready for the table. So as you can see here, I think the panel lining is what gives us a proper sense of depth and a proper sense of shape. Our camouflage would break all that up and blend it all out a little bit, but that little bit of panel lining just really helps. Now, of course, you could go on in and do a little bit more if you want. You could weather the plane a little bit. You could get a bit of streaking going on out of the exhaust. You could just use some Nuln Oil. Even at this stage, you could just use some Nuln Oil and just drag that back to follow the curve of the wing a little bit, depending on how much you want to do. You could obviously stipple a little bit of silver onto the leading edges of the wings or anywhere you want. It really does depend on how far you're willing to go. How much detail you're willing to add. In this case, I think we have a plane that is perfectly table ready, does everything or has everything it needs. It has all the colors at once. We have our invasion stripes, which are very striking alongside the markings, and the yellow as well. Really makes the model stand out on the tabletop, which is what we always want, particularly when you have a box of 2 of these, so you have a flight of 2 coming in, and they just look great flying over all your well camouflaged tanks and all your drab stuff, and then you get this big flash of color coming in. It's really evocative, really interesting. So with that all said and done, thank you so much for watching. Maybe this one has inspired you to give a little bit more to your aircraft for Flames of War, even for Team Yankee. Like the techniques, the steps are all basically the same. Just research your color scheme and just go for it and see what you come up with. Until next time, thank you again for watching. Take care, stay safe, and see you again very soon.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.